The night has stayed etched in my memory like a scar that refuses to fade. I was 24 years old, living once more under my parents' roof in Mansfield, Ohio, a place that was supposed to offer safety but instead wrapped itself around me like a tightening chain. My name is Claire Dunn, and I can still feel the sting of that evening when my father's hand crashed across my face because the soup I had prepared lacked salt. The sharp slap burned my cheek, but the deeper pain was the smirk curling on my mother's lips as she stirred her spoon in silence, satisfied with my humiliation. The room had grown so heavy, the air pressing down on me as though the walls themselves disapproved of my very existence. I muttered an apology with trembling lips, but inside me something cracked, a fracture long in the making. For years, I had been their target, both physically and emotionally, absorbing the blows of their frustrations while convincing myself I deserved none of it. That night my father leaned in close after the table had cleared, his breath soured by whiskey. His words slid like blades against my ear. "At noon tomorrow, an important guest will arrive. Cover that bruise and smile, or you will be out of this house." His eyes bore into me with threats I had known all my life, and though I nodded outwardly, appearing obedient, a tide of anger churned beneath my skin. He left the house the next morning as though it were any other day, marching toward his boss's office with his usual air of certainty, never realizing that the balance of power had already begun to shift. I woke before the sun, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, dabbing layers of concealer onto the purpling bruise along my cheekbone. My hands shook as I brushed each stroke, willing the wound to disappear. Guests would soon arrive, and appearances mattered more than truth. In the kitchen, I cracked eggs into a pan, the sizzle filling the silence while my father stormed in with his tie already knotted and his expression demanding. "Hurry up," he barked, "and don't ruin breakfast like you did dinner." I bit my lip and obeyed, moving like a servant in my own childhood home, his eyes scanning me like I was little more than an object he owned. 6 months earlier, I had lost my job at a Columbus advertising firm during a sudden downsizing. With no savings and no place else to turn, I moved back to Mansfield, hoping to find comfort within my family walls. Instead, I discovered that my father took full possession of my bank account, claiming it was for my own good. He granted me only $50 a week, a pitiful sum that barely covered gas and groceries, while he and my mother, Barbara, enjoyed the wealth passed down from my grandfather's estate. Barbara, with her sharp perfume and sharper words, was no kinder. Just the day before, when I spilled coffee grounds while cleaning, she sneered that I was useless, incapable of handling even the simplest of chores. As I plated breakfast, my father ordered that I set the table for lunch. His tone was as sharp as a blade slicing through my thoughts, and I murmured yes, Dad, though my mind spun back to my lost dreams. After college, I had envisioned a life of independence, maybe even success in the city. But here I was, trapped again. He checked every transaction I made, lecturing me for hours over something as simple as buying a scarf. The money had been mine, but in his hands, it became a tool of control. I was halfway through folding napkins when my phone buzzed on the counter. The number was unfamiliar, but instinct urged me to answer quietly. "Claire Dunn," a man's voice said, formal yet tinged with urgency. "My name is Stephen Hayes. I manage your grandfather's trust fund, and we need to meet today. There are irregularities in your account." I froze, glancing at my mother who had just entered, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What kind of irregularities?" I whispered, heart hammering. "Unauthorized withdrawals," he said firmly. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" My pulse raced, the phone hot against my ear. I agreed quickly, masking my panic when Barbara demanded to know who had called. "Just a friend," I lied, sliding the phone into my pocket. My heart would not stop pounding. Something was wrong, something deeper than I had dared to imagine. And for the first time, a spark of defiance flickered inside me, fragile but burning. The chains they had wrapped around me were not unbreakable. Noon crept closer with the weight of an approaching storm. The house smelled faintly of polished wood and perfume, a stage set for an illusion of family perfection. My mother moved briskly around the dining room, arranging flowers and straightening cutlery as though she were preparing for royalty. Her smile, when she paused to glance at me, was brittle and commanding. "Do not embarrass us today," she warned, her words laced with venom disguised as concern. I nodded, swallowing the lump rising in my throat, but inside I wanted to scream. When the doorbell rang, I carried a tray of salad to the table, praying the concealer still covered the bruise on my cheek. My mother motioned for me to answer the door, and I obeyed, my hand trembling on the knob. On the porch stood two of her friends, Linda Carter and Susan Gray, their chatter bright and false, and beside them, a face I had not expected. Jonathan Price. The sight of him rooted me in place. We had once been close during our years at Ohio State, bonding over late-night study sessions, mutual frustrations, and dreams of futures we had yet to shape. His grin faltered when his eyes found the shadow of the bruise beneath my makeup. "Claire," he said softly, stepping inside. "It has been a while." My voice wavered as I forced a smile. "Good to see you, Jonathan." Inside, the gathering unfolded like a carefully rehearsed performance. My mother played the charming hostess, laughing at Linda's stories, while Susan praised the table setting as though it were worthy of an award. I kept my head down, serving salad and pouring tea, replaying my father's harsh command. No mistakes, no truth. Jonathan leaned closer as I filled his glass, his voice barely above a whisper. "You okay? You seem off." His concern washed over me, prying at the wall I had built around my heart. I managed to whisper, "I am fine," though my voice cracked with betrayal. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You do not look fine," he said, his hand brushing mine in a quiet plea for honesty. Before I could answer, the front door swung open. My father strode in, his briefcase in one hand, irritation etched into his features. "Traffic was a nightmare," he growled, tossing his jacket onto a chair. His gaze landed on me with the precision of a hawk. "Why are you standing there? Serve the food." I flinched and obeyed, my cheeks burning as Jonathan's hand fell away. But I noticed the way Jonathan's jaw tightened when he looked at my father. My mother's smile never faltered, but her eyes cut toward me with silent warning. "Everything is perfect," she cooed to the guests. Her mask remained intact even as mine threatened to shatter. In the kitchen, I retrieved a tray of sandwiches, my hands trembling. Jonathan followed, pretending to help. "Claire," he whispered urgently, "that mark on your face is not nothing. Talk to me." His words broke against the dam I had built, and for a moment, I wanted to collapse. "Not now," I hissed, glancing at the dining room where my mother laughed too loudly. Jonathan's eyes searched mine, filled with the same determination I remembered from our college days. "I will call you tonight," he promised. "We are not done here." Hope stirred inside me, fragile but alive. After lunch, as the guests departed with polite goodbyes, Jonathan sent me a message asking to meet at the park. My fingers hesitated over the phone, fear gnawing at me, but I typed a quick reply and slipped quietly out the back door. The park was quiet, the air crisp with autumn. Children played on swings in the distance while Jonathan waited on a bench. His expression was serious, his presence steady. "Claire," he said, rising to greet me. "We need to talk now." His voice carried the urgency of someone unwilling to let me hide anymore. I sat beside him, clutching my purse as though it held my entire existence. He looked directly into my eyes. "What is really going on? Do not tell me you are fine." My throat constricted, but the truth tumbled out at last, shaking and raw. "Since I moved back, my parents have been hurting me. My father hits me for the smallest mistakes, and my mother either watches or joins in. They control everything. My money, my life. I feel trapped." Jonathan's fists clenched at his sides, his face darkening with anger. "That is not okay, Claire. You do not deserve this." I shook my head, fear clawing at me. "If I speak up, they will throw me out. I have nowhere to go. My father has control of my bank account." Jonathan leaned closer, his voice steady and resolute. You are not alone. I will help you find a way out. His promise sparked a fragile flame of courage inside me. I did not know what tomorrow would bring, but, for the first time, I felt the possibility of change hovering just beyond my fear. Later that afternoon, I drove to the small office of Stephen Hayes, the man who had called me about my grandfather's trust fund. The building was tucked into a strip mall on the outskirts of Mansfield, unremarkable from the outside, yet the weight of what awaited inside pressed heavily against my chest. I sat across from his desk, my palms damp, my heart thrumming like a drumbeat in my ears. Stephen slid a neat stack of papers toward me, his expression grim. Claire, your grandfather's trust fund, the one set aside for you, has been tampered with. Someone has withdrawn $75,000 using your account as a cover. The words slammed into me, knocking the air from my lungs. Who? I asked, though my mind already whispered the answer. Stephen's voice was low but firm. The trail leads back to your father. He has been siphoning funds for over a year. My breath caught as I stared at the documents. The numbers blurred, rows of theft disguised as legitimate transactions. My father had always claimed the trust was tied up in legal disputes. He had been lying all along, stealing from me while cloaking his crime in control. Stephen leaned forward, his tone both compassionate and stern. Your parents have legal access as co-trustees, but what he has done is fraud. If you do not act, not only will they keep taking from you, but you could be implicated. Filing a complaint is the only way to protect yourself. My fingers trembled as I touched the papers. File a complaint against my own father. The thought alone filled me with dread. His anger was volcanic. My mother's disdain, icy and unrelenting. They would destroy me. But Stephen's eyes didn't waver. This is not just about money, Claire. It is about your future. If you do not act, you will never be free of them. His words planted themselves deep inside me. When I left his office, my phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan. Are you okay? I didn't answer immediately, but the thought of his steady voice calmed me, reminding me I was no longer completely alone. At home, the weight of secrecy pressed down as I slipped the documents into my bag and hurried past my mother. She demanded to know where I had been, her tone sharp and suspicious, but I mumbled something about errands and rushed upstairs. My father wasn't home yet, but his presence lingered in every corner of the house, oppressive and suffocating. Alone in my room, I hid the evidence, my mind a storm of fear and betrayal. Jonathan's promise replayed in my head. You are not alone. Stephen's words echoed louder. If you do not act, they will keep controlling you. That night, lying awake in the suffocating silence of my childhood room, I realized the truth. Something had to change. The fear was still there, but another force had begun to grow, quiet yet determined. Courage. The next evening, I stood in the living room clutching my bag, the documents tucked inside like a weapon I barely knew how to wield. My heart raced as I faced my parents. I know about the trust fund, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. You stole $75,000, using my name to hide it. My father's face contorted in disbelief that quickly twisted into anger. You're making up stories now, he spat, leaning forward in his armchair. My mother crossed her arms, her lips curling with contempt. Ungrateful, she hissed. We gave you a roof, food, everything, and this is how you repay us. Their accusations cut like knives, but I refused to flinch. I have proof, I said, gripping my bag tighter. Bank records. Transactions. Years of lies. My father slammed his hand on the armrest, his face flushed with rage. You are out of line, he barked. Go to your room before you make this worse. I turned away, my chest tight, but instead of retreating, I pulled out my phone. I dialed the one person I could trust outside these walls. Ellen Brooks, our kind neighbor, answered after the second ring. Claire, what's wrong? Her voice was gentle, concerned. I took a shaky breath. I need your help. It's about my parents. Minutes later, I slipped across the yard under cover of darkness, my bag clutched tightly. Ellen ushered me into her warm kitchen, her eyes searching mine. I explained everything: the trust fund, the abuse, the confrontation, and when I finished, her face was grave. "I've suspected something was off for a while," she said quietly, pulling a small recorder from her drawer. She pressed play, and I heard my parents' voices crackling through, arguing about money. "If Claire finds out about the 75,000, we are finished," my father hissed. My mother's reply was sharp. "She won't. She's too weak to check." The sound hollowed me out. Proof. Proof that their betrayal ran deeper than I had dared admit. Ellen's eyes softened as she spoke again. "There's more. My security camera caught your father shoving you in the driveway, your mother yelling on the porch. It's all on video." I stared at her in disbelief, my mind reeling as she reached for her phone. "I know someone who can help," she said firmly. "A reporter named Richard Moore. He is digging into corruption here in Mansfield. He wants to expose cases like yours." She dialed him that night, and his voice carried through the speaker. "Claire, if you have evidence, I can make sure this story gets out. But you will need to go public. Are you ready for that?" I hesitated, the thought of the entire town knowing my family's darkness tightening my chest. But then Ellen squeezed my hand, and I remembered Jonathan's steady gaze, Stephen's warning, and the truth captured on those recordings. "I am ready," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. A few days later, I found myself in a quiet coffee shop downtown, the hum of conversation and the smell of roasted beans wrapping around me like a fragile comfort. Jonathan sat across from me, steady and reassuring, while Richard Moore, the reporter Ellen had introduced me to, leaned forward with a notepad and pen at the ready. Between us lay a folder filled with every piece of evidence we had gathered. Stephen's bank records, Ellen's recordings, and the footage from her security cameras. I flipped through the pages, each document a reminder of the betrayal I had endured. Richard's eyes lit up as he scribbled furiously. "This is explosive," he murmured. "I will hold the story until after the trial to maximize its impact, but when it comes out, it will shake this entire town." My throat tightened. Filing a lawsuit against my parents felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, about to leap into a storm. But Jonathan's calm presence grounded me, his hand brushing mine briefly, a touch that sent a warmth through me I hadn't felt in years. Back in college, we had danced around the possibility of something more, but life had pulled us apart. Now, his unwavering support stirred those feelings again, and for the first time, I caught myself smiling despite the fear pressing down on me. That evening at home, my father cornered me in the kitchen. His face was carved from stone, his voice low and threatening as he shoved a document across the counter. "Sign this. It clears up the trust fund. Misunderstanding. Do it or you're cut off. No money, no house." I glanced down and saw a legal waiver, a lie claiming the 75,000 had been a family loan. My stomach twisted as my mother stepped forward, her eyes cold. "Don't be stupid, Claire. Sign it and move on." I stared at the paper, my heart thundering. Every instinct screamed to obey, to avoid their wrath, but I thought of Ellen's recordings, Jonathan's encouragement, and Richard's promise. The word escaped my lips like a strike of lightning. My father's eyes widened, his hand twitching as if to strike, but I pushed the paper back across the counter. "I'm not signing anything. I know what you did, and I'm done hiding it." My mother gasped, her face paling, but I didn't wait for her response. I grabbed my bag, stuffed with essentials, and walked out the front door. My legs shook, but I didn't look back. My father's threats echoed in my mind, yet they no longer held me prisoner. Ellen welcomed me into her home that night, her spare room already prepared with fresh sheets and a warm lamp glowing by the bed. "You're safe here," she said, pressing a cup of tea into my trembling hands. For the first time in months, I felt a breath of freedom. Jonathan arrived the next morning, standing with me on Ellen's porch as the autumn air swept around us. "You're braver than you think," he said gently, his eyes soft with admiration. I laughed shakily, my chest tightening. I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm falling. His hand closed around mine, his grip steady. You're not falling alone. His words anchored me in a way nothing else had. Our fingers remained entwined, and for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a life not ruled by fear. By the end of the week, Richard called to confirm he had drafted the article, holding it until after the trial. Your parents won't walk away clean, he promised. His confidence bolstered my own, though fear still gnawed at me. My parents would fight back, but for the first time, I was prepared to face them. With Jonathan by my side and Ellen's roof over my head, I was no longer their obedient daughter. I was someone fighting for her life. The cold morning of the courthouse arrived like the beginning of a new chapter. I stood before the judge with Stephen's documents, Ellen's recordings, and the footage in hand. My parents sat across the room, my father rigid and defiant, my mother's face pale beneath her practiced calm. I recounted everything: the stolen money, the abuse, the manipulation. Ellen's recording played, my father's voice echoing through the courtroom. If Claire finds out about the $75,000, we are finished. Each word felt like a chain breaking, one by one. The prosecution presented the case clearly, proving my father had forged signatures and siphoned funds for personal use. While my mother was complicit, her direct involvement was less tangible, so the charges focused primarily on him. After hours of tense testimony, the verdict was delivered. My father was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to repay the stolen $75,000. My mother avoided jail time, but she sat silently, her reputation in shambles as whispers spread among the onlookers. I met my father's glare as he was led away in handcuffs, his eyes burning with rage. But I didn't flinch. For the first time, I felt untouchable. Outside the courthouse, the crisp autumn air stung my cheeks, but I hardly noticed. Jonathan's arms wrapped around me in a steadying embrace, his words quiet yet strong. You did it. His warmth anchored me even as the reality of the verdict settled in my bones. Victory felt heavy, not triumphant, the kind that left you trembling with exhaustion after a long climb. My father's empire, built on intimidation and lies, was crumbling. Jonathan explained later that he had contacted some of his business partners in Columbus, men who had once trusted my father with consulting contracts. They had cut him off without hesitation. No more contracts, no more deals. Edward Dunn's name had become poison in the very circles he had once ruled. By evening, Richard's articles splashed across the front page of the Mansfield News Journal. Local couple exposed in trust fund fraud, daughter reveals abuse. The headline screamed the truth I had been forced to hide for years. Richard painted a stark picture of theft, manipulation, and the bruises hidden under layers of makeup. Mansfield buzzed with gossip. Neighbors who once smiled at my mother turned away when she passed. Her polished social circle evaporated overnight. At Ellen's house, where I still stayed, we read the article together. You've changed things, Ellen said softly, her eyes filled with pride. People are listening. My chest tightened with a mix of relief and fear. The town's gaze felt overwhelming, yet empowering. For once, the whispers weren't aimed at breaking me, they were directed at the people who had tried to destroy me. The next morning, a call came from Donna West, president of the community board. Her voice carried both warmth and determination. Claire, your courage has inspired us. We'd like you to serve as an advisor for the Community Trust Fund. The role would allow me to oversee grants for local families, ensuring no one else experienced the kind of betrayal I had faced. You've proven you can stand up to corruption, Donna said. We need that strength. I was stunned. For so long, I had been trapped in a cage of fear and silence. Now, I was being asked to use that pain as fuel to help others. I left her office in a daze, Jonathan waiting outside. He leaned against his car, his smile lighting up his face when he saw me. What's the news? I told him about Donna's proposal, and his eyes shone. That's perfect for you. You're going to make a difference. His faith in me stirred something deep. We walked to the park nearby, the same place where I had first confessed the truth of my parents' abuse. The autumn leaves crunched beneath our feet, and when we sat on the bench, our shoulders brushed. I looked at Jonathan, realizing how much he had become my anchor. Not just a friend, but someone I trusted with my fragile future. Mansfield, once a cage, was slowly transforming into a place where I might rebuild. Back at Ellen's, I stared at the article again, its words no longer frightening but solid, like a foundation I could stand on. Edward was behind bars. Barbara was shunned. The power they held over me had dissolved. Donna's offer and Jonathan's unwavering support opened a door I had never imagined. For the first time, Mansfield felt like a place where I could stay not because I had no choice, but because I wanted to claim it as my own. A month later, I stood in my modest new apartment downtown. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint and cardboard from the moving boxes still stacked along the walls. I had paid for the space with $30,000 I received as partial restitution from the trust fund. Each piece of secondhand furniture, a sturdy table, a worn but comfortable couch felt like a step toward independence. Stringing fairy lights across the living room, I smiled at the thought of decorating not a cage, but a home. Jonathan and I had grown inseparable during those weeks. At our engagement party, he had knelt in the very park where my pain had first spilled into the open, his proposal simple and heartfelt. Now, as I sorted through wedding invitations, I made a decision. Edward and Barbara would not be invited. A letter from my father had arrived in prison, filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. My mother had called once, her voice shaky, promising to make things right. But their remorse came too late. Their shadows would not follow me into this new beginning. Barbara had already left Mansfield, her reputation ruined by Richard's article. Whispers followed her until she packed up and moved to Cleveland. Edward remained in prison, serving his 5-year sentence, a constant reminder of his crimes. At first, the loss of family stung, but over time it felt like shedding a weight I had carried too long. With Donna's encouragement, I launched a nonprofit for survivors of family abuse. We called it Haven, a name that embodied safety and hope. We offered resources, counseling, and community. Jonathan handled the paperwork, Ellen connected us to donors, and Richard wrote a follow-up piece highlighting Haven's mission. The work was exhausting, but fulfilling. Each story I heard, each survivor I met, reminded me why I had fought so hard. One evening at a town hall gathering, I stood before a crowd of neighbors, my voice steady as I shared my journey. I lost my family, I told them, but I found my strength. No one should live in fear inside their own home. The room erupted in applause, and Donna nodded proudly from the side. Jonathan slipped his hand into mine as he whispered, "You are amazing up there." His eyes glowed with warmth, and I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was leading. The wedding day arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, the vineyard bathed in golden light as leaves whispered in the wind. Rows of vines stretched across the horizon, their quiet beauty framing the small gathering of family I had chosen, not the one I had been born into. Ellen walked me down the aisle, her smile radiant, her presence a stand-in for the parents I had lost. She squeezed my hand as we reached Jonathan, her eyes glistening with tears. Richard and Donna sat among the guests, their support a testament to the community I had found. The absence of Edward and Barbara was not a shadow but a victory, a silence that honored the boundaries I had finally drawn. As I faced Jonathan, his eyes steady and filled with love, the world seemed to hush around us. "I promise to stand by you," he said, his voice clear and unwavering, through every fight and every victory. My vows echoed his, a pledge to face the storms and savor the triumphs together. The words felt like more than promises, they were freedom, carved into the air with conviction. When we kissed, the vineyard erupted in cheers, the sound wrapping around us like a blessing. The reception glowed beneath strings of fairy lights, laughter mingling with the clink of glasses. We danced beneath the stars, the music carrying us across the floor as though the earth itself had lightened beneath our feet. I caught Ellen wiping away a tear, her face a mixture of pride and joy. Richard raised a glass in a toast, his words painting me not as a victim but as a survivor who had turned her scars into strength. Donna clasped my hand, whispering, "Haven is changing lives because of you." In that moment, surrounded by people who had chosen me and whom I had chosen in return, I realized family was not defined by blood but by love and loyalty. Jonathan spun me on the dance floor, his laughter ringing in my ears, and I thought of the long road that had brought me here. The trust fund, the trial, the newspaper article, the nights I had spent hiding bruises, all of it had led to this. Mansfield, once a place of pain, now shimmered with hope. Later that night, Jonathan and I sat in our small apartment, still in our wedding clothes. The fairy lights I had strung weeks earlier glowed softly in the corner, casting the room in a warm embrace. My gown pulled around me, the lace catching the light as I leaned against him. For the first time, I reflected not with fear but with gratitude. I had learned a lesson carved from hardship and resilience. Family does not justify injustice. Love does not excuse control. Standing up for yourself, even if it means losing those closest to you, is the only way to reclaim your life. I had paid a price: parents, security, a past that could no longer be mended, but in return, I had gained something far greater. I had gained Jonathan, a partner who believed in me without conditions. I had gained Haven, a mission that gave my pain purpose. I had gained a voice that could not be silenced. As I looked out the window at the twinkling lights of the town, I knew my journey was far from over. Challenges would come, trials would return in new forms, but I was no longer the girl who hid bruises under makeup or whispered apologies into the silence. I was a woman who had walked through fire and emerged whole. The quiet streets stretched before me like an open book, waiting for the next chapter. Mansfield was no longer my cage, it was my canvas. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to write my own story.